So good afternoon. I'm Dan Hatfield, and I'm with the Coordinating Center for the National Collaborative on Child Obesity Research, or NCCOR. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's installment of the Obesity-Related Policy Systems and Environmental Research in the U.S., or OPIS workshop. And if you're able to join us yesterday, welcome back. We're so looking forward to today's workshop. And again, thank you all who have called in to join us. Next slide. First, just a couple of technical details. If you have any problems logging into the webinar, you can email us at ncor@fhi360.org for troubleshooting support. And if you have questions for our speakers, please share them using the Q&A feature on the bottom of the screen. We'll relay those questions to our discussion moderators, and we may not have time to get to every question, but we'll look to cover as many of them as we can. Next slide. We'll be tweeting today's webinar from the @NCOR Twitter account. And to join the conversation, please use hashtag OPIS. Next slide. So if you aren't familiar with NCCOR, we're a collaborative public-private partnership of 4 leading research funders: the National Institutes of Health, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Our mission is to accelerate progress in reducing childhood obesity for all children, with particular attention to high-risk populations and communities. Our website, ncor.org, has a wide range of tools and resources that are free and publicly accessible. So if you aren't familiar with the site, we invite you to check it out. And if you have any questions about the organization, please reach us at ncor@fhi360.org. Next slide. So as we did yesterday, throughout the day today, we'll use a platform called Mentimeter to hear from the audience. So we're going to try that out with an easy first question. What is your favorite fall fruit or vegetable? So use your phone to scan the QR code, or you can go to menti.com and enter the code at the top of the screen to join. Your responses are completely anonymous, so we hope you'll join in. All right, we got some sweet potato lovers. Apples have joined the discussion. Ooh, delicata squash. Some pomegranate. Butternut squash, one of my favorites. Pawpaw, some Brussels. Pears, another good one. Guava. Terrific. Thank you so much, and we hope you'll continue to join us for other mentees throughout the day. Next slide, please. So first, I wanted to share a bit of background context for why the Planning Committee at NCCOR wanted to put on this workshop. So in our early conversations, members of the planning group noted that we've been talking about the importance of policy systems and environmental approaches for a long time. For example, the Institute of Medicine's Accelerating Progress in Obesity Prevention report, which was issued now over a decade ago, outlined the importance of such PSE approaches. Yet progress toward implementing comprehensive PSE interventions has been limited. And in the intervening years, obesity rates have increased and disparities have persisted or widened. We know that more coordinated PSE interventions addressing an array of systemic drivers of childhood obesity may be needed to advance progress. So the planning group wanted to put together a workshop to help us think through how to accelerate progress for that type of work. Next slide. So with that in mind, the group put together this 2-part workshop series exploring how to advance progress toward both the design and rigorous evaluation of PSE interventions. From the start, we talked about the importance of including not only changes targeting proximal factors like food access and parks and recreation, but also more distal factors like income and housing policy that also play an important role in child weight and child health. The goals of the workshop were, 1, to understand key learnings from past research and evaluation and really establish the state of the science. We also wanted to explore critical methodological challenges and other considerations for PSE approaches to child obesity research. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, to meaningfully advance child obesity research and inform future directions for the field. We've enlisted some of the top thinkers in the space to help us think through where we need to go next. Next slide. So part one of the workshop was held back in June and included an incredible set of presentations from experts in the US and abroad, including individuals addressing not only obesity, but also other public health challenges like tobacco control. Some key takeaways included a recognition of the critical need to authentically engage community partners and other multi-sector actors. And that's a theme that will come up again in our presentations today. We also found that there were many examples of individual PSE approaches that were successful, but comparatively few true whole-of-system transformation efforts. The first workshop also acknowledged the potential for complex systems models to strengthen and improve the design, implementation, and evaluation of PSE approaches. We also identified a pressing need for demonstration projects that address multiple influences on child obesity concurrently. And then finally, as I alluded before, we talked a lot about the importance of addressing not only proximal influences, but also more distal factors to truly have equitable impacts. Next slide. With the second workshop, we've aimed to build on learnings from the first, but with more of a methodological focus. So here, we really wanted to dig into the how in terms of how we move this work and the field forward. So on day one, which was yesterday, we had 2 sessions. The first focused on planning and engaging across sectors and settings. So that talked about engaging both community partners and other multi-sector actors. The second session talked about applying rigorous designs to the evaluation of PSE interventions, particularly recognizing that gold standard methods like randomized controlled trials can't be applied to evaluate many PSE interventions. Today, our third session will focus on adapting, scaling, and sustaining whole-of-community PSE interventions. We'll start out with a keynote from Terry Huang, followed by 2 panels. The first panel will focus on approaches for ensuring PSE interventions are both locally relevant and sustainable. The second will talk about the integration of broad social drivers in PSE interventions. Finally, we'll have a closing discussion in which we'll distill out key learnings from the workshop and summarize where the field needs to go next. Next slide. So the final panel will be with our 3 amazing co-chairs, Dr. Jamie Shariki, Tamara Dubowitz, and Shariki Kumanyika. They have been incredible partners to the NCCOR planning group, and their thinking has really been instrumental in guiding the design of this workshop. So special thanks to Jamie, Tamara, and Shariki. Next slide. So on a related note, it's my pleasure to turn things over to Dr. Shariki, who will be introducing our keynote speaker. Dr. Shariki is Senior Associate Dean and Professor of Health Policy and Administration in the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And as I mentioned on the last slide, she has been an incredible co-chair for the Opus Workshop Series. Dr. Shariki.
Thanks very much, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm really excited to introduce today's workshops. First, I'd be remiss, though, in not taking a moment to acknowledge what happened last night in Florida. And for those of you like myself who may have family affected by Milton, my thoughts and prayers are with everyone, as well as people who have been affected by Hurricane Helene. So I'd like to turn it over now and introduce our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Terry Huang, who's a close colleague and friend of mine. I'm really honored that he's able to join us today. Terry's a professor and chair in health policy and management and director of the Center for Systems and Community Design at the City University of New York Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. He's a global leader on systems-oriented community health, cross-sectoral partnerships, design thinking, collective impact, and the translation of science to policy. He was one of our featured presenters in Opus One, and he's also on NCCOR's external scientific panel. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Terry. Terry will be presenting briefly for about 20 minutes, and then we will have time for questions and answers at the end of his presentation. So please be sure to enter your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat, and we will be happy to take as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Terry?
Thank you so much, Jamie, and thank you to NCCOR for inviting me to this wonderful workshop. So I'm really excited to be having this opportunity to share with you some of the new work that our team is doing. And I'll frame it in particular in the context of thinking about how to optimize the implementation and sustainability of community-engaged interventions. So let's move on to the next slide. So to start, I kind of want to open up this afternoon's conversation around, how we can think about intervention and sustainability. So this is a framework that we borrowed and adapted from Lennox and then subsequently refined by Moreland Russell. And you can see that there are lots of elements that contribute to intervention sustainability, including how intervention is designed and delivered in the first place, a range of implementation processes, but also organizational and external settings, and all those factors that come into play that would either support the sustaining or the expansion of stakeholder capacity, the marshaling of resources, so on and so forth. So what I'd like to show today is through a case study that's part of a project that's ongoing, and to show you kind of how through a design thinking approach, we could potentially impact on some of these critical factors that can then ultimately contribute to intervention sustainability. Next slide. So one of the key ways in which design thinking would potentially impact those sustainability factors is through the various mindsets that are part and parcel to design thinking. And these mindsets are actually really hard to acquire and master. In many ways, some of these mindsets are kind of at the opposite end of how we are trained as empiricists in public health research. And so some of the things I want to call out include, to start, empathy, developing a deep sense of empathy and being really human, patient, and/or community-centered. It's much harder to do than what meets the eye. Also, this idea of really working with your hands, not just thinking conceptually about problems and solutions, but actually building things with your hands. That's also something that is quite different than how we typically do things in public health. And that has a lot of implications for how we actually prototype and trial, test, mini tests, if you will, the prototypes out in the real world. Embracing ambiguity is also really important. This process is by nature very organic and very iterative. And oftentimes we as researchers don't necessarily know how things will evolve with the community stakeholders that we're working with. And being able to be comfortable with that and ambiguity is actually really important, but also really hard. It takes time to master. Iterate. This is what design thinkers will always tell you, that you just have to rapidly produce ideas and prototypes, and then most importantly, learn from those failures because most of the prototypes are not going to work. And so throughout this process, the techniques that design thinkers employ help foster a sense of creativity, a sense of curiosity, and really radical collaboration across people who may come from very different walks of life, and then ultimately achieve a sense of clarity as to what is the problem, what is really the deep-seated problem that we're trying to solve, and through the iterative ideation and prototyping and testing, we also gain clarity on what a likely and truly innovative solution might look like. Next slide. So to kind of put this back into, again, kind of a 30,000 feet view of how this relates to, implementation, dissemination science, we published this opinion piece, I think earlier this year, where we illustrated how systems thinking and design thinking can really work together to generate more effective implementation processes and ultimately enhance the constructs that are important for scale up and sustainability. So just want to kind of put this in this broader context of D&I. Next slide. So now I want to move into a case study that's based on an ongoing project called Supporting Parks and Revitalizing Community Study, or SPARKS. And the goal of SPARKS is to enhance neighborhood vibrancy by using a design thinking process to activate recently renovated parks in surrounding community as a way to improve community level quality of life and mental health. So this is a community level intervention, and we're looking for the intervention's impact on community level outcomes. And we designed the study to be really community engaged, not just community based. And the way that we're doing the community engagement is through this design thinking process. Next slide. So this is a very quick overview of the process being employed in this project. And so we started out with a very significant deep dive involving different kinds of ethnographic field work, as well as baseline interviews and surveys to really help us understand the nuances and the dynamics of relationships in a community. And then we move on to building out, processing all of those data, but then also building out what we call local design teams. So these are essentially members, residents, from each of the communities that we're working in. And they come from different walks of life. They have different expertise. Some have been involved in park-related activities before, and some haven't. And it's very much an iterative process. We didn't just say, oh, here are the 10 names, and then, ready and set, and we go. We've actually, accumulated or brought in, new individuals throughout the past year, where we've been doing this co-design process at 4 communities. And we continue to envision that these design teams will continue to shift and change over time. And then once we have kind of a critical mass of the local design teams in each community, we move into the co-design process. So this is a facilitated process where we're working with a design firm called 3x3 to collaborate on how, building out this kind of journey with each of the local design teams to help them come to kind of a common understanding of where the local problems are, what they want to achieve, and ideate and prototype potential solutions that will serve the ultimate project goal. And then we'll move into implementation at the first 4 sites in this coming year. Next slide. And click one more. So for the rest of this talk, I want to zoom in on the community co-design process. And this is the general framework that we're using for this design thinking journey in each community. We start out with a phase 1, which is grounding, moving into knowledge mobilization, which is phase 2. Phase 3 is ideation or idea generation. And then phase 3 is prototyping and co-determination. Next slide. So I'll go through these relatively quickly. These are mostly visual slides just to give you a more visceral feel what the local design teams are experiencing on the ground. So in phase 1, with grounding, we start out by actually having the local design team members close their eyes and imagine 5 years from now, what is the headline, the news headline that they think they would love to be able to communicate about the impact that they will be having. We also, asked them to think about what success metrics look like 2 years down the line at the end of the full intervention process in each community. Next slide. And we go into pretty significant lanes to have the local design teams build out a stakeholder map, and differentiating different kinds of stakeholders from those that are most affected to ones that may be more distal to the project at hand. Next slide. And I mentioned earlier that one of the mindsets, or maybe I didn't say it out loud, but it was on the slide, but one of the key mindsets in design thinking is really attention to process-related details. And so as part of the grounding exercise, we also spent a lot of time with local design teams to have them really think through the different milestones in each of the 4 phases of this co-design process. What are the different roles of design team members, and what are the promises they want to make to the community as a result of this process, and all the different informational inputs and outputs. And so all of this stuff is done, up front, but then also revised as the journey continues, and so, but we always come back to this process, so making sure that everything is aligned and everybody's on the same page. Next slide. So moving into phase 2, knowledge mobilization, we started out by, so remember in the overview of the process for this project, we did a lot of the ethnographic work up front, and then we did a lot of internal work on the research within the research team to actually distill those data into useful and meaningful information. So we created community profiles, for example, which were then shared with the local design teams as a starting point in phase 2. But what's really cool is that then we quickly then go from there to a set of exercises where the local design teams are presented with different techniques that they themselves could employ in engaging with the rest of the community in order to collect more knowledge, more insights from the broader community out there. And so that's really important, because this work is not only about working with the local design teams, the whatever 4, 5, 6 members, that may have been recruited at a given time, but actually really democratizing the engagement process through the local design team. And so here we're just showing 4 examples of techniques that local design teams could select from, and we let them vote which ones they think would be the most relevant, for their community. And then we took them out to the community and, have them actually participate in the collection of additional knowledge, additional insights from just regular residents out in the community. Next slide. And again, coming back to process alignment, once a local design team zooms in on a particular community engagement exercise that they would like to deploy, we walk them through the process, so have them really kind of plan out in advance how they're planning to reach out to the different groups that they want to target. What are some of the activities that they can use to engage the audience, capture the attention of the audience, and also any specific locations or organizations that we could potentially go to really increase our chances of engaging with the audience that's being targeted. Next slide. So here are just some pictures showing our team, out in the community. So these are pictures out in specific parks within the study sites. Next slide. Here are some pictures where we're actually doing the debriefing. So these are local design team members alongside the members from the research team and the 3x3 design team, and they're processing the insights and turning those insights into design principles, as well as the distillation, of information that will then be useful for ideation and prototyping. Next slide. Okay, moving along. I have 5 minutes left. So here just some visual ways that I think designers are just so good at in using to capture the insights, and you can think of this as a form of affinity mapping, but in a very visually engaging process. So the insights are being turned into so there were a lot of prompts, that were being used as part of the community engagement process. And for each of those prompts, they're like essentially nuggets, of insights that can be turned into Post-its. These Post-its are then grouped into specific things, much like how we do thematic analysis, in traditional public health qualitative research, but this is just much more participatory and much more visually engaging. So it's engaging different senses, not only keeping this information in the cerebral space. Next slide. The different things are then fed into what we call program activation principles. So here you can see one example. Principle 1 is about having programs that could really be lifelong or intergenerational. Principle 2 would be something around safety, in the park spaces. And then principle 3 would be doing something programmatically that really represent the cultural mosaic of the community. Next slide. So in phase 3, we're doing idea generation. And again, so a lot of this work is done out in the community, led by the local design team members. And so we had done prior work to distill kind of 4 big buckets of potential park or park-related activities that communities can implement. So whether it's arts and culture or physical activity and sports, career training and skill building, and or sustainability, environmental stewardship. Those are kind of the 4 general buckets that we had validated by looking at both historical activities in New York City at all the different parks, as well as actually surveying community members. And, we felt pretty good that these 4 buckets kind of capture, the vast majority of potential ideas that could be generated. So we're out in the community, and members of the community can essentially just indicate the ideas that they have. They can put them onto these big poster boards that we've created. Next slide, please. Here you'll see some of the idea cards if people want to write in more details rather than just putting a Post-it on the poster board. Next slide. And then we sort these, into, again, those 4 buckets that we talked about once we bring all of the idea cards back into the studio. Next slide. And then we also have the local design teams think about the impact by effort matrix and how the different ideas might sit in different quadrants. Next slide. So then we go into the prototyping and co-determination phase. And here, so we, in collaboration with the local design team, the research team, and the 3x3 design team, took all of those ideas and elevated the most promising ideas and turned them into low fidelity prototypes, using these poster boards and graphics. And then we went out into the community again, with a local design team to, again, both get validation from the local community members, as well as generating additional ideas, once they're kind of being inspired by these prototypes. And then that information is then taken back again for additional processing. Next slide. So we're now moving into the implementation phase. And as part of the implementation phase, we're bringing in additional stakeholders, such as citywide, policymakers and planners from NYC Parks. We have community liaison or community engagement officers from the City Parks Foundation, all of whom are going to be part of this implementation process so that we can ensure sustainability down the road. Next slide. So again, going back to our sustainability constructs that I showed earlier, all of the constructs that are bolded and underlined in this graph are constructs that we feel that the co-design process, even in just this first year, has already impacted. We certainly developed a common agenda for each of the community, which was not easy to start, but I think we made significant progress. We've overcome a lot of opposition and really built, I think, a common set of beliefs, that yes, this is something that they can do in their own community. And I think the process has really created a sense of empowerment and a sense of ownership among the local design team members. Next slide. And so here are just, some kind of more detailed nuggets, which I won't read, by essentially really reflecting on, as part of this midterm, evaluation process, how like the specific elements of the design thinking process, both the creation, the mindset, and as well as the techniques that are employed, are really enhancing stakeholder participation and stakeholder empowerment, as well as the intervention and adaptation and receptivity. Next slide. And we can skip this these quotes. So in conclusion, I would say that through this experience, I can confidently say that, design thinking is an action-oriented approach that I think really has the potential to enhance key factors that contribute to sustainability. And again, a key way in which design thinking influences sustainability constructs is through the fostering and mastering of these design thinking mindsets. Design thinking techniques elicit curiosity and creativity. I showed you all those visual ways in which we carry out the process. And ultimately, this process can support intervention adaptability. We can achieve intervention fidelity. I very much believe that, while allowing for implementation adaptability. But I think the critical thing here is that the implementation processes should be clearly measured and documented. And this is going to be a very big part of our hybrid trial throughout the rest of this initiative. I think that public health needs more training in design thinking mindsets and techniques, something that we're just beginning to do, but I hope that this is just a starting point, and then we'll be able to do this more broadly across the US. And then finally, design thinking can be a useful strategy for more effective community engage, not just community-based research. Thank you. Sorry, I went a little bit over time.
Thanks so much, Terry. So we have 4 minutes and I've got so many questions. Let me quickly dive in here. So yesterday we heard a lot, and also in Opus One that you also participate in, about systems thinking, the importance of active community engagement in this work. One of the challenges we heard about with systems thinking yesterday is it's complicated, not something that all stakeholders really understand the concept of systems thinking. So as I listened to you talk today, it made me wonder if you view design thinking as a more tangible approach to systems thinking that community members and decision makers can better relate to, and sort of how you see the two integrated.
Yeah, so going back to that graph that I showed early on in my talk, I think that systems thinking and design thinking can actually work very well together, right? So systems thinking, comes with it a set of tools and techniques that can help us better understand the community dynamics. It can also be used to virtually test, different interventions once we have, some ideas on the table. But I think design thinking is much more hands-on. It's on the ground in the community, and so we can parlay any insights that we get from systems models, for example, and try them out, in the community. And so they're not contradictory. They actually can work together. And so the purpose of that paper that we published is to actually articulate how together both sets of tools and techniques can be used to enhance implementation and ultimately contribute to scalability and sustainability.
Okay, so next question. These are rapid fire. We heard yesterday a lot about how long it takes to do this work, and you sort of mapped out this really, elaborate process you all have been going through. I didn't get a sense from your talk about like how many grants are you talking about that you've been doing all this work under, and has it been leveraging funding from multiple sources? Can you just briefly touch on that?
Yeah, so this work right now is an extension of our prior parks project, where we were just doing essentially a natural experiment evaluation of the impact of citywide park design renovation. And we then got another R01 to do this large implementation effectiveness trial that is Sparks. And so it's funded mainly through just this one big R01 from NIMHD, but we also have some additional resources from the PRC, the Prevention Research Center that I co-lead.
So like all the formative design thinking, code design sort of
That's
phase.
part of the R01. That's all part of the R01. Yeah.
And you're able to do all this in 5 years, including the implementation.
Probably 6. We know we're going to need that no-cost extension.
I think we're out of time. I don't know if I'm allowed to ask a last question or not. But really quick, we heard a lot about challenges and the need to support our community partners, resources, and otherwise. Obviously, they're key partners in everything you described today. How do you actualize that in your work?
To
Provide resources and
to
support.
engage the partners.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's kind of the beauty of this co-design process, because we did have many members who were skeptical and some people dropped off, but we adapt. Some people, they were maybe skeptical at first and we say, okay, well, you can be an advisor. You don't have to necessarily show up to every meeting that we have, every design jam, but we'll still keep you up to date, on what's going on. And it's amazing, how people like kind of transformed over time, because of this process. This process is so empowering that even those who were opposed at the beginning or skeptical at the beginning, they end up actually being, the most engaged, becoming real champions. So I really feel like there's power in this process. It's a little bit hard to articulate sometimes because you really just can't believe it till you do it and see it. But I become a convert myself. And I think what's amazing about this brand is that we have actually, for the first time, a way to empirically test the effect of this process. That's actually the intervention. The intervention is the process.
Well, now I'm getting pinged that we're over time. So Terry, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
I'm going to turn it back over to Dan. Thanks.